Thank you everyone that is joining us today. We're super excited to be hosting Matt Wizinsky for a conversation today in design. For those of you that are not aware, we are the Chicago Graphic Design Club. We're a fairly new organization. We'll actually be celebrating our 1-year anniversary in May. And we exist as a platform for designers to get together to talk about both the theory and the practice of graphic design. If you're not already doing so, you could follow us on Instagram. We have a Facebook, Twitter, or you could also visit our website here to get the latest on any upcoming events, which my colleague here will be sharing with you in just a bit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you all of our upcoming events. So we have office hours, which are every month on the first Thursday, and they're a lot of fun. It's just a time for us to get together and talk design, whatever anybody wants to bring. If you want to bring a portfolio that you want peer reviewed or just chat about design, yeah, we'd love to see you there. We do a book club also. Our next book is called Design Justice. It's by MIT Press, and we're really looking forward to reading that. And then also we are having a talk coming up with our very own Lauren Miranda, which we're really excited about as well. We'd love to see you there. Lauren, why don't you tell us about the talk?
Thanks. And I go by both. I have two first names.
Awesome.
Two first names are last. But thank you. Yeah, I look forward to talking with you all next month about the role of design in the development of public monuments and memorials, asking, do monuments matter? Must they be forever carved in granite and steel? Who and what is worthy of monumentalization? And then who gets to decide? So I hope to see you all then to discuss more.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Melody, and I am a contributor for the club. And we're going to go over how the questions are going to be used. So throughout the talk, out of respect for our speaker, when you have a question, instead of interrupting, what we can do is that we can put a Q in the chat along with the question. And so I just sent a sample in the chat. And so we're going to be pulling all those questions throughout the event on our side. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session, which is going to be a little bit different from how we've done so in the past. So we're going to have those questions as well as opening it up to all of you as well, instead of just having one person proctor the discussion. So when we get into the Q&A, Christian is going to explain a little bit more at the time. But what we're going to do is that at the bottom near record under reactions, you can raise your hand. And then we're going to call on you at random so that you can ask Matt a question and discuss with him instead of us asking those questions for you. So thank you so much for being here. And with that, I will hand it back over to Christian.
Cool. Awesome. So today we're here to celebrate and to learn from Matt Wizinsky. He is a designer, researcher, and educator at the University of Cincinnati. And yeah, I've known him for quite a while now, and he's a very talented person, and just very excited to have him here today. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand it over to you, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, everybody. Let me pop over to my screen here. All right. You guys can see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me, and thank you, Christian, for the introduction there, and good to see so many familiar but also new faces here. Lauren and I were classmates, seems like not so long ago, but I guess it was a little bit of a while ago. Yeah, and you know, Chicago and Chicago design have a special place in my heart. I feel like I spent my formative years as a designer in Chicago, and even a lot of the projects I'll share today are still Chicago connected, even though I've been in Cincinnati for about 6 years now. And I think what's really beautiful is the kind of like design community that I felt very fortunate to be a part of. And it's amazing that you guys have started this thing that's almost 1 year old already as a platform and a place to get together and share these kinds of conversations, ideas, etc. I also understand it's kind of a book club, which is exciting because I have some news to share, which is about books in a little bit here. So the title of the presentation is "And the World Isn't Flat Anymore," and I both thought that was kind of an appropriate title for someone whose background is really in like flat design, typographic design, graphic design, but has been working in, I think, really multi-dimensional kinds of ways. It also happens to be the name of one of my favorite songs by the Chicago punk band, The Vindictives. So if there's anybody who's like a Chicago punk fan, like this is not a coincidence. I usually try to find some kind of like cultural reference that's appropriate. So I guess in short, I mean, all of my degrees say graphic design, but most of my titles say different kinds of things. I have studied design in a couple different places, have practiced design for some time, 20 plus years. And over the last, I guess, 8 or 9 years have kind of entered into an academic space where my I still continue to run an independent studio practice, but really most of my efforts, most of my, I guess, day job is focused on looking at ways that design becomes an integral part of research. And that can mean like a lot of different things, but, and that's kind of what this is about, is like a lot of the different ways that a graphic designer finds themselves to be productive in the space of research. But also means, you know, thinking about, you know, what it means to write, publish, disseminate, exhibit, you know, be a part of the kind of like the mechanisms that put this stuff out into the world. To give just a very brief kind of like background, you know, image of what I mean by that, you know, I've done, you know, quite a bit of work in, or maybe, you know, print design, book design, identity design, kinds of graphic design, have done quite a bit of exhibition design. Particularly, always like the Chicago shout outs too, right? Like, but particularly proud of this exhibition from 2014 at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Matt, sorry to interrupt, but I think
Yeah.
are you screen sharing? Because it's just a black screen right now.
I am, I'm sorry, you're seeing nothing. Okay, let's try this again. Do desktop share.
There you go, now we can see.
Okay. Okay, you missed almost nothing. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, particularly, you know, have worked in exhibition design fairly extensively. This particular exhibition, which I think is also thematically connected to a lot of the stuff I'll talk about today, which is really thinking about how, you know, how, in this case, historical precedents of kind of radicalness in architecture and urban design become kind of a springboard for thinking about new radicalness in architecture and urban design, bringing together architects from both Chicago but around the world to use the history of Chicago as like a springboard for thinking about new possibilities. And I think exhibition design into interaction design in kind of an expanded way. So, you know, it means like augmented reality projects. This was a really exciting kind of project that was thinking about how, you know, Chicago floods every time it rains, and sort of thinking about how to think about green infrastructural planning, and how you can give, you know, at a community level, people opportunity to make decisions based on interface design, as well as more kind of immersive, environmental, interactive kinds of things, like this installation that was done in Cincinnati. And so the talk, I took the liberty of making a minor correction here, which was not only focused on design contributing to shaping a multidimensional world, but actually making worlds. And it seems like a very didactic kind of clarification, but I think the point is, you know, all of the kind of multidimensionality that goes from, you know, graphic design into things like, you know, interactive, multimedia, augmented reality kinds of things, is one thing. And then this other thing I want to talk about a little bit today is this aspect of world making. And so this very short sentence at the top here, design as world making, is also the opening line of a book that I just wrote, which will soon be published by the MIT Press, and is a very kind of like simple but loaded statement, you know, what this idea of making worlds is all about, backed up by the ample footnote here. But also that I think what's important to note is that like different kinds of design make different kinds of worlds, and there are many different kinds of worlds that all of us can inhabit within even some of the worlds that we share, or the big world that we share. So what I want to talk about today and share some examples of is really thinking about how graphic design as one particular kind of competency can really fit into, bigger complex research projects that are either interdisciplinary or non-disciplinary, which means, research that really is not just about or for design in any way, but also to think about how design can contribute to doing that research in ways that are mutually beneficial for the participants. And so I'm thinking about, not just sort of non-exploitative research, but also research that actually produces something, produces experiences or knowledge or skills that are useful to those that are participating in whatever's happening. It's a lot easier to draw a Venn diagram of it than to actually do it. But I mean, these are really like the three basic pillars or three basic principles of what I would call translational research. And this is a term that has its own history, particularly in medical research. But it really, it thinks about, first of all, sort of for a designer, design being right at the center of research, the designer becoming, equipped to become, in the mix with interdisciplinary research projects, whatever that particular blend of knowledge or expertise or goals might look like. Obviously, there's often divergent agendas. It is, I think, sort of parallel to the idea that the design to be done is really evidence-based. The design to be done is based on this kind of research at the forefront of the work being done. And I think the most particularly important pillar here is about the fact that, the people that are participating in this are all sort of equal in their footing, maybe equal stakes in the game, even if they're bringing different capabilities to what's happening. So people at the center of this activity of design and research. And so, my particular take on it is specific in a couple of ways. It's about communication design. It's about information. It's about data. It's about making certain kinds of interactions in public spaces, et cetera. And is really about sort of how communication and community or the communal sort of come together, how it is that we share how it is that we come together and we share experiences with shared commonalities, but also how we make unique different things out of them. And so that's kind of, I think, the emphasis of it. I love this map. This is a map that I have started using as like my North Star for trying to understand like what I'm doing in any given project, but particularly in different phases of a project. It's called An Evolving Map of Design Research and Practice by the design researcher Liz Sanders, who I happened to meet when I was like 19 years old and had no idea what research actually was. But Liz Sanders made this map in 2008 and sort of updated it again in 2014. And I think what she's identified is kind of this growing, expanding, but also shifting landscape of what design practices look like, but also naming that there are like a really wide range of ways in which we can think about design practices and design research. And I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of my education was right up in this left corner in a kind of expert mindset, design-led, like I studied typography intensely. I am the expert. I know how to do it, et cetera. And I think that over the last 20 plus years, a lot of design practices have sort of slid into the user-centered design model, which I think is good in many ways, but has also left open this space, and I think this space has been filled in some ways by what Liz Sanders calls here critical design, but also has been filled maybe in other ways. And I think what's important to me about the map is it just says, like, it doesn't mean that because a center of gravity has moved that the map is suddenly, empty, that suddenly there's nothing there. So parallel to all this, I think, participatory models of design practice, at least in my life and my experiences, have been something sort of on the periphery. And I think they've really started to enter a little bit more center stage and how a lot of people understand or think about what it means to do research as a designer. So I'm going to use this map as kind of a guidepost to talk about a couple of different examples where projects that I've engaged in have tried to sort of situate themselves in all different positions of this map. And so it's not about sort of picking one, but it's about understanding how to use them differently. And I will not overly bore you, even though you're, I understand, kind of a book club with all the definitions, but as I will, frequently tell students or anybody, it's really hard to define any part of design because design itself is hard to define. And that's in part because it's always at least three different things. Like there's the action, the verb version of it, there's the kind of output that you make, and then there's like, what is it as a bigger activity that we can talk about? But, long story short, the participatory design, mindset is is about the fact that you really engage people who are going to be impacted in the work that you're doing across the spectrum of activities that make up research or design. And this is, I think, much bigger and often a little thornier than some of what we understand as like co-design or collaborative design kinds of processes. And it's not just that those can, I think, sometimes be exploitative, but it's actually that the kind of, from my understanding, that the origin of this kind of work is strongly rooted in a very particular kind of like political idea, which is about the sharing of authority and like how things get done, how things get understood, how things get implemented, et cetera. And so it's fascinating history that Kristen Nygaard, who's also one of the co-inventors of object-oriented programming, decided that when implementing complicated technical systems in Norwegian ironworks factories, that actually the people who are going to be affected by these new technical systems should have a say in what happens. And like the managers, the workers, and the union, everybody should come together and sort of talk about what's going to happen when we develop these systems. So it's a very, I think, strongly political and democratic idea about how the work is done that's kind of central to this work. I have been, for the last several years, all the way back to when I was a faculty member at UIC in Chicago, been part of a research collaborative called History Moves. And it's been really about this intersection between participatory design and public history. And so again, the emphasis here is like how could design contribute to the making and telling of public histories in new ways. And it has to do with collection, it has to do with editing, it has to do with, you know, how we make what we make known to be understood publicly. And so this is really, History Moves is really kind of a platform. It's a way of doing this work that I've been doing for about 7, maybe 8 years now with Dr. Jenny Breyer, who is the director of the Gender and Women's Studies program and a professor of history at UIC. And what we've developed is a really messy, kind of amazing model that really thinks about how design and history have different kinds of expertise that come together and then like make themselves facilitators for the participants that we work with. So we organize our projects around relationships with certain kinds of groups. And in that process, we make toolkits, we do workshops about what it means to conduct an oral history interview. The people that we're working with, whether they're high school students from Chicago or whether they're HIV survivors, which is a recent project, they interview each other. So it's really about sort of teaching the skills of doing interviews and having the participants interview each other. We get into this middle space, which is, really the sprawl of like hybridity, where how do we discover and make connections? How do we name the themes? How do we edit and curate the material? How do we make it understandable to a general public? How do we contextualize this? Because history isn't just like a bunch of personal stories. It has to kind of fit into a context. And so you can kind of see, methods that are not like wildly, unheard of here, but sort of brought together in a particular emphasis on how images, words, etc., come together to start to make a kind of idea of a narrative, and then how those narratives become aggregate and become shared. And then, of course, we also put them out into the world. We make exhibitions, we make books, we make short films, and the process of producing those materials is itself another opportunity for kind of democratizing how decisions get made in the process. This particular project that I'm sharing some examples for is a project we've been working on for some years. It's called I'm Still Surviving. It's a collaboration with the Women's Interagency HIV Study, which is, wait for it, the longest running longitudinal study of women living with HIV in the United States, in operation since 1993 at Johns Hopkins University. But we've worked with women from 3 really different social geographies in the United States: Brooklyn, Chicago, North Carolina, and have produced a wide range of materials to make the process of telling these stories and collecting these stories an opportunity for these women to, as I sometimes say, like become authors of their own stories. It's not just about us collecting them and telling them, but they really are becoming authors of it. And so a lot of the work that has come out of this is bouncing back and forth between what a really participatory model of doing something looks like, and then how do we bring our particular and specific kinds of expertise to producing that material. So I saw that Neha Man is here, former grad student. So Neha worked with me for some time. We were developing even an app that was a tool for collaborative curation. So after we've collected all these stories, after we've whittled them down and edited them into an exhibition to tour the country, you know, how do we make a tool that allows the women to say, hey, if that's going to come to Chicago and it's going to be in my neighborhood, these are the stories that need to go in it when it's close to me. Or, you know, if it's going to be in Brooklyn and it's going to be, you know, in this part of Brooklyn, it needs to tell this part of the narrative. So we did all of this work. Of course, COVID came along and upended every possibility of in-person traveling exhibitions with immunocompromised people. And so we pivoted to make a series of a collection of digital exhibitions. It was always my strong feeling that it must be physical, it must like occupy physical space, but I bent a little bit to the situation. And so we merge this stuff into a collection of kind of visual experiences, visually kind of curated narratives, audio narratives, as well as a series of books, multimedia books that we're still in the process of finishing, but are available in different formats specific to the location. So I encourage you to visit it. It's at stillsurviving.net. We just launched that on World AIDS Day last December 1st. So it's a fairly new project, but many years in the making, I should say. And what has happened in this kind of like anonymity to authorship movement is that the women that were participants, these women are the anonymous subjects of a medical study, but in engaging in this particular project, they have become docents for exhibitions. This is the group from Brooklyn, but some of the Chicago women, for example, have toured exhibitions we put on in Chicago for hundreds of high school students. They have become speakers at public events, and again, I probably don't have to overstate the issue of stigma related to people who are HIV positive, and some of whom are still not disclosed to people close in their family, but at their own step-by-step consent, of course. These women have really become spokespeople, not just in the authorship, but really become public faces of the stories that they're telling. And these are not these are a wide range of stories when it comes to putting women at the center of the history of HIV, which has sort of always focused initially on gay men and then eventually on drug users. And these stories are far more wide-ranging than that. But to see these women, giving opening lectures at exhibitions, to be panelists at film festivals and things like that, interviews on radio, public television, online, etc., is really, to me, sort of a symbol of the way that this translational model works. That they have become, have stepped up into their expertise in a way. I have not totally given up on the idea that it will occupy physical space. We're currently in the kind of throes of figuring out how to connect we have, I think, over 300 audio clips that are thematically collected in a way that if you're to listen to them, hear the women's, in their own voices, with interviews that they conducted with each other, set up in a way and sort of designed in such a way that it's unlikely that you'd have the same experience twice. It's a very nonlinear audio experience, and we're working on ways that we can implement posters with QR codes, or other ways that we can really occupy the specific neighborhoods where these women in these 3 different cities where these stories have come from. I think it's really important that they kind of go back to where they've come from. And again, it probably isn't lost on anybody here that we're talking about a pandemic that most of us have probably kind of forgotten about, and all of these women are survivors of that pandemic. And so suddenly, unbeknownst to us, the sort of final moves of this project would end up in a space where we're really asking, what does it mean to survive not only a pandemic, but really to survive public concern over a pandemic? And I think this is a kind of a prescient moment to think about those issues. And so, not to belabor it too much, but there are aspects of this project that have sort of pinballed between these different kinds of design practice and different kinds of design research. A lot of it's over here in the participatory mindset, thinking about how do we do this work? How do we do this work in a short amount of time in a clinic in Brooklyn, with these women. How do we set it up so that we can edit, name, and curate this material together? And what are the ways that design can help with that? Doesn't do everything, but certainly my collaborators and an expert in doing public historical work. But there are a lot of ways that the kind of methods that we've developed have been augmented by design. There are moments when we have to admit that we really are, experts, and we really know what we're doing when it comes to particularly like formal and media design making, expert execution of these kinds of things, etc. And there are moments when we admit that we also need to like lead in with research to do things like usability testing, etc., so that the kind of things that we're producing are going to be usable and viable when they reach a public audience. It's been really fascinating working on this particular project for a long amount of time. As part of the academic experience, every project takes longer than you would think it would. But in the process, have developed a kind of interesting transdisciplinary like expertise with my collaborator. We have just recently written the main essay for a book that's about kind of the history of graphic design and HIV/AIDS, to be published later this year by the RIT Press. University of Rochester has the largest collection of posters and public communications, health communications related to HIV/AIDS. And so we wrote an essay pulling together, how we see this material, both as an historian of HIV/AIDS and a graphic designer. And it's also kind of amazing that in the time that it took for us to write that essay and have that essay published, some of the other contributors like Dr. Anthony Fauci and Abram Finkelstein have sort of come to the fore again. So, both Fauci and Abram Finkelstein, who's the founder of Grand Fury and ACT UP, also contributed essays to the same book. Okay, so I'm going to shift attention over to the upper quadrant. This is the expert mindset design-led space. And again, I think this is where a lot of my own education started. But as Liz Sanders has kind of indicated, as I think a lot of practices have moved, sort of slid down the map, as it were, into this user-centered model, she identifies critical design practices as something that has occupied that space. And again, the obnoxious three-part definition, but suffice it to say, I mean, some of what I think speculative and critical design is all about is really about thinking about how design can make possibilities or proposals or ideas become kind of material, can embody them through prototyping, so that we can think about what might be good or bad or otherwise about where things might be going. And this typically has a strong bent towards how technology and design come together to make everyday life differently. Heavily focused on possibilities, meaning that most of this work is not necessarily saying we should do these things, but we should think about these things as possibilities and discuss them. And again, I think it makes it necessarily political, because it's like who is this for and who gets to decide? I've been teaching a course for the last several years called Speculative City, trying to bring this kind of approach to design to undergraduate students in fashion design, industrial design, communication design. It's a ball, that's all I'll say, but really sort of studying different trajectories towards different kinds of futures. We spend, different years will focus on different topics like artificial intelligence or, about, the end of capitalism and things like this. But it's a beautiful reminder, I think, of the way that design really materializes ideas, and the way that once we can start to handle some of these things and handle some of these ideas, we can have a different kind of conversation. We can have a different kind of thinking about them. It was amazing to see a fashion design students project make the cover of AIGA's brand new academic journal Dialectic. So it's like extra layers of nerdiness there, but the cover of the academic journal of AIGA has a fashion design students project from that class on the cover, which is kind of exciting. And this interest sort of led me to go study strategic foresight, the sort of specific discipline of studying the future at the University of Houston. They have a very particular model. You've probably seen maybe some version of this idea of the cone of possible futures, which the basic premise is that as we get further and further away from the present, the range of possibilities opens up. And what strategic foresight is all about really, as Peter Bishop says here, is really about about that multiplicity, not the singularity of the future, but about futures, and thinking about how we can make decisions about futures, et cetera. What I really love about this particular model is they don't forget that history has something to do with that trajectory, and not every model I've seen of this takes that into account. So the second project I want to talk about is sort of bringing this combination of public historical work and public history work to the audience of teenagers, to young people whose 20 or 30 year future is my present, basically. And so this is a project that brought together history, fiction in the form of cinema and media studies at the University of Chicago, as well as a speculative design project called Southside Speculation. We worked with 23, we basically, a number of faculty at UIC, University of Chicago, and myself put together like a 2-summer curriculum for 23 teenagers from Chicago South and West Sides to do this work, to really think about the future in a more participatory but also speculative kind of way. And I probably don't have to tell this crowd too much about, Chicago-ness, but, when I give this presentation in different contexts, like to think about, Chicago's contribution to American history and America's sort of sense of social identity, particularly when it comes to things like, urban innovations, the idea of being, this wild, metropolis that would, pick every building up 6 feet off the ground because of the flooding and would build the tall, the first skyscraper and all this stuff. And yet is also the most segregated city in the country, with this extreme, divisions in which the kind of like radical urban innovation doesn't seem all that well distributed. And so we worked with students, I should say young people from these particular neighborhoods in Chicago. And I think to write the question as generically as possible, it's sort of like how do young people from neighborhoods that were actually constructed with segregation in mind, how do they think about technology as an aspect on shaping the future? And then we had some particular layers there, thinking about climate change, thinking about health, and thinking about how space is used. And the short the answer here is like a little bit differently than maybe most tech companies, researchers, or designers might think about these things. And so the curriculum unfolded over two summers. So we had a lot of ground that we covered. One focused on doing public historical work, and then one focused on doing speculative design, and using a lot of the same kinds of methods and materials that I would bring to a college classroom. Rapid prototyping, letting the making of objects carry narratives about possibilities, letting some fundamental like making of microelectronics, doing things that were sort of like low fidelity ideas about a more complicated system that could do more complicated things. And it was really, again, a fascinating experience, like it is in the classroom at the University of Cincinnati, to watch how making even very low fidelity prototypes really advances the kinds of narratives that you can carry and think about where things are going. In the end, we had 5 different teams of students or young people make 5 different projects along these 3 themes. This was 2017, 2018. Hard to think of themes that are like more relevant today, than these 3, but they were, spot on, I think, both in their moment and in the present. And so, from these like rapid prototypes to working with graduate students in design and architecture at UIC to make more refined prototypes, to learn about learn about using like the Fab Lab and things like that, to make refined prototypes, but also working with filmmakers, Afrofuturist filmmakers in Chicago, filmmakers at the University of Chicago to make these short little films that sort of carried the narratives of the prototypes that they had created. We exhibited this work in a couple of different places on the South Side. This is at the Arts Incubator space in Hyde Park. We're working on an online exhibition of this material and hoping to do some follow-up interviews with the young people that we worked with, just to understand if or how this kind of experience has shaped their lives, their experiences, the kind of work that they're doing today. Which, yeah, we'll see how all that comes together. But I also would like to say that I think that this experience of exhibiting this work kind of punctured any kinds of criticisms about gallery spaces being some kind of like rarefied, like nothing ever happens there. Watching a bunch of high school students like bring their families and friends in to show off the work that they did, which was speculative design work about the future of technology and health, and talk about it like in a gallery space was yeah, pretty amazing. So again, there are different features of the project that bounce around the map, and part of, I think, what worked for me anyway was being able to identify what different aspects of what we were doing required a different approach, required a different lens. You know, like certainly a lot of it was in this kind of facilitating speculative design workshops, but that in and of itself brings a certain kind of like design-led expert mindset and that kind of thing as well. I'm going to share one last project, and I will try not to totally rush through it, but I'll also be cognizant of time here. I was invited or accepted, I guess, in 2009 to be part of one of the research fellowship teams presenting at Exhibit Columbus in Columbus, Indiana, which you may know is one of these sort of like 20th century architecture mecca in southern Indiana. I had never been before. It was amazing though to have all these like cool architecture and design people all in one place. I think he's the only person who was not an architect or urban planner or something like that. And to do a project, you know, that was kind of an opportunity to bring together some of these ideas yet again, this case collaborating with Sean Lally, who's a landscape architect currently in Switzerland, but formerly also at UIC. And we really wanted to think about, you know, how do we bring together, you know, augmented reality, landscape architecture, speculative design as an opportunity to like let people really experience data, public data in a public space, make conversations, etc. You can imagine we geeked out on, you know, some of the philosophy and like what was this project all about. And I think one of our kind of like go-to keywords here was this work by Timothy Morton about hyperobjects, and he sort of describes global warming as a hyperobject. It's too big, it's just physically too big, and in time it's too big. It's just like you can't even think it all at once. You touch it all the time, it's everywhere, but you can't even really like hold it in your mind, you know. And so we really wanted to like think about like how do you play with an idea like that in a short-term public installation. We had lots of other, you know, goals here, thinking about different kinds of public infrastructural projects, even just like park lighting or drinking fountains. I mean, all of these are nods towards bringing an element of health into public space and building new public infrastructures. Wanted to think about the fact that it is kind of a park space, it is a public space, and wanted to bring, you know, public data to bear upon it. And so we ended up creating an installation that was sort of half like an intervention in the landscape, which actually created a microclimate using the kinds of lighting that are used for seasonal affect disorder, heating the ground just a little bit to keep the grass growing when it got too cold. And then the other half of it, which was an augmented reality experience that was trying to pinpoint this kind of hyper objectness, like that this little patch of grass has a history and a future that's so much vaster than we can really comprehend, and wanted to bring it together at like planetary scales of time, historical scales of time, and the sense of you walk in and touch that grass and feel the warmth and feel the light, like the right nowness of it. And so worked with a bunch of different researchers to gather data from an EPA site in Columbus to basically collect, I mean, it's like no surprise, like, yeah, it's warming up. And if you parse the data just right and visualize it, you can kind of see those red lines mean, yes, it's been getting warmer. 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit increase over 120 years, which is kind of hard to see in, you know, the averages, but we designed it so that you could really kind of register that. And wanted to make an experience that was, you know, of course, like publicly engaging, but also really helped people understand like what was happening like on this little patch of grass as kind of a stand-in for anywhere. And so, so many things to say, but I'll just, if I could, just play this little video, if it will play, give you kind of an idea of it. This is like about speculative plant life that could emerge over millennia of change and radiation. Data visualization in a kind of tunnel. There's air quality data that's being drawn inside of it, and so on. And if nothing else, I got to use this, I should have said it right off the bat, my favorite jokes. I got to use Eliel Saarinen's 1943 First Christian Church bell tower as a tool shed for the whole summer, which was also kind of fun, and also definitely climbed to the top of that thing. And so once again, it's a project where, we had to sort of consider where different approaches of, sort of leaning into expert mindset designerness was useful for thinking about the speculations, thinking about data viz, like actually crafting augmented reality. We had to do, some amount of UX design in terms of, prototyping and usability, et cetera. And this part might not seem quite as obvious, but we worked with a lot of different public institutions, including, public researchers on collecting the data. Had lots of arrangements had to be made so that we could actually do this installation. But we also worked with the Visitors Center, which was right across the street, and we knew we'd be touring this exhibit, this very weird exhibit with lots of, frankly, elderly people who like, what's augmented reality? But at the same time, working with the public library and working with librarians that were putting together programming for teenagers and school-aged kids. And so they were building sort of like citizen science, environmental science, climate change kinds of curriculum around kids like playing inside this AR installation. And so it really, again, the Liz Sanders map was really productive. I'll bypass a little bit of this quickly, but suffice it to say, a lot of these things have led to certain kinds of understanding about the expansiveness, I think, of design and its way of doing world making, but also running into some of the limits. And I think it was particularly in this project when I was, working with researchers and reading a lot of research from sustainability studies, et cetera, when this was like such an amazing statement to me from 2019, not that long ago, from Giuseppe Fioli, said like, all of this work has really failed to engage with any significant analysis or critique of capitalism as kind of like a hard limit on what sustainability might actually look like. And I thought, damn, man, it's the same true for design. Any of the conversations that I've been involved in and what it might actually look like to make, healthier futures, for teenagers on the South Side or women who are survivors of a pandemic, et cetera, suffer a little bit from this kind of colonizing logic about how, like, what is the limit of what's possible? And so suddenly Timothy Morton's language is valuable again. Like there's another hyper object that I think somehow is too big to think, but is kind of pervasive and is something to be dealt with. And so I wrote a book about this. I'm excited to say maybe for one of the first times publicly, it'll be published next year by the MIT Press. So nothing else, I get to put Muriel Cooper's cool MIT Press logo on the book somewhere. But I really think it's for me, it's an organizing principle. It's an organizing idea to bring into the fold these different kinds of discourses about as design expands in its purview, as it expands in terms of what it can and should do, as it expands in its responsibility, it runs into new kinds of challenges, ethical challenges, et cetera. And I think there's a strong connection between these kinds of things and this, not the only one, but a pretty big envelope that contains, I think, a lot of design practice. And so this is the gist of it. Nobody wants to really look at a table of contents, but I just wanted to share. I mean, it's a little bit about history. It's a little bit about critique, but it's really emphasizing there are alternatives, and we have a lot of precedents out there. So there's a lot of historical precedents that I would, classify in these different ways. There's theory stuff, et cetera. But I also really wanted to make it a very usable book. And so I very much, took as much as I could the opportunity to use my sort of strategic foresight approach to say like, hey, there's multiple post-capitalisms out there, and some of them are not great. Some of them might be better. And like the work of getting there is not easy, but here's how we might get started. And so ends with principles, strategies, and specific guidelines, even really getting down to the project level, the practice level, the disciplinary level. How can you ask yourself questions about what you're doing and how it might be, constrained or could be unconstrained by certain kinds of logics that are in place because of the political economy that it might be unfolding in. So lots of exciting, both lit review stuff, but also design history stuff and design precedents, and really for me an exciting opportunity to like pull together a lot of material that I've been reading but was not about design explicitly, but always reminded me of design. Had a very wonderful short-lived relationship with Eric Olin Wright, American sociologist who passed away just 2 years ago, just before he passed away, becoming like a guest critic in his 40-year work on real utopias, as he called it, like building real different models of living, and having him as a guest lecturer in design studios was kind of an amazing experience. But stitching together, historical precedents like Enzo Mari, who was, proposing way back in the 70s a kind of radical anti-capitalist communist approach to furniture design, to my friends Alice and Gavin Monroe, who have figured out how to grow furniture and are doing so, in the UK Highlands right now, but reclaiming sort of ancient techniques of coppicing plants, finding the Fibonacci sequence that when you start to put these things together. You want to know what the cover's going to look like? And so do I. I don't know. It'll be out next year. It's like, who's going to design the cover? What's going to look like? I don't know yet. I don't know, guys. But at least the Muriel Cooper logo will be there. So I guess it'll be okay no matter what else happens. Okay, so that's what I have to share with you guys today. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. That was a wonderful talk. I'm going to open up the floor for other people to be able to unmute themselves and ask any questions. I see there's a few questions in the chat here. I do want to ask one of them from Melody. She asks, were any of the Southside projects presented, offered up as solutions to aldermen or city government outside of the gallery space?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer exactly. Meaning I don't know that there was any particular I don't know that there's any particular line of communication with aldermen in specific neighborhoods. I will say that it was one of those projects that was kind of amazing, and like just how many people kind of got involved. I mean, there were a pretty wide range of artists, activists, journalists, historians, etc., from Chicago. So I wouldn't, it's like I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know of a sort of a central line of communication to aldermen. But I think I have a lot of other things I could say about that, but I think it's an interesting comment and question, which is like, how does this kind of like participatory speculation find through lines to government officials or to policymakers? And there are some pretty interesting precedents of that stuff, but that was not a central feature of what we were doing.
Okay. And then I have one question, like, how do you see the relationship between your traditional flat design experience, carried over into something that's a little bit more participatory?
So
I'm mostly asking from the point of view of a traditional like graphic design person wanting to immerse themselves in some of this type of, like what's that?
I mean, I think this is going to sound maybe, I don't know, cliche or something, but I mean, I think it's sort of like understanding, like on the one hand, like an appreciation for like what visual communication can really do. I mean, this title doesn't, I mentioned some of the references to this title, but I come from a particular, I guess, tradition of graphic design education that's about, when you're in the space of the poster or whatever the composition is, you make a world, and you get to make up the rules of that world. And you just have to convince somebody that it's a world worth entering. And that once you're in that world, the rules there can be different, but they just need to be sort of believably cohesive to themselves, And so that's, I guess, like what I can say sort of about that. I think on the flip side, it's understanding that like, yeah, there's lots of amazing people that you can work with that have like wildly different skills. And it's nothing short of incredible when you find out that what you do can actually improve what they do, And so working with a historian who, she's definitely not a designer in any sense of the term, but when it comes to, okay, this is what we want to do together. In this next phase, in this next workshop, what we want to be able to do is to engage this group of people to achieve X, Y, and Z. Okay, how could I think about doing that? What elements of visual communication, even just typesetting, like typesetting quotes, you know, and putting them on the wall in a certain way, assembling them in a certain way, putting them next to each other in a certain way, or not, to encourage or discourage, or just open up the possibility of making connections. These are like dead simple things that we do, you know, as designers in our head constantly, all those little decisions about how type sizes, type choices, or spatial relationships make meaningful relationships. I think when you start to see that you can like make that happen outside your own head, that is very powerful, and people can latch onto it and understand it and use it, you know, and use it for their own ends, which I think is great.
Cool. Thank you.
Hey, Matt. So immediately when you were talking about the like map of, you know, if it's critical design, participatory design, whatever, but like, and you were talking about how design education has traditionally situated itself in that critical design space, yet I don't know if I'm in a bubble as well, but I feel like my practice is also in the participatory design realm. And as a professor, it's like, well, how do I kind of let design education live in more than one area? And I was wondering how you handle that in your classrooms and in your pedagogy.
I know, probably poorly. Or a handful of current and former students here who can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know. I think that I hope that what I can do is to just articulate that there are just different ways, and you know, I have you know, the nice thing I think about sort of teaching, and I mean, I teach in a program where I teach a lot of classes, like every semester, there's a lot of classes. And so there are different ways to lean into different aspects in different courses, you know. The program I teach in, for better or for worse, is a fairly big undergraduate program, which means there are a number of courses that can kind of like, you know, lean in specific directions or another. The speculative design course that I mentioned, I mean, this is an optional course for students in the School of Design. So it's one of usually like 9 or 10 optional courses at that part in the curriculum. And again, it's not just for communication design, but also fashion and ID. And you know, the students that land there, like they really are the students that want to be there. Like they are definitely the ones that that pick that one for a reason in their own particular interests. In courses that are, I think, focused on things like design research or research methods, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to sort of talk about these things, which is like, you know, they're like, we don't have to really pick a place in the map, but we can find different times that we sort of move around and decide like, what is the next step and what are the goals? And even for the sake of trying something more participatory, let's do it in a more participatory way. And like, what would that look like? And how do we, you know, how do we craft the method to do that? Now, after we've done that, what's the next step? Is the next step going to be a little more, you know, user-centered approach, or is the next step going to be going back to the, you know, I'm the expert, I know how to craft the final perfect thing mindset? And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I fully understand that these are competing, and these can be very competing, but I also think they can be complementary.
Great. And then I have another question. So what would you like, so it appears that every time you're engaging in a new project, the process and like the framework that you're working through is constantly changing. Is that a correct assumption? Or do you have like a very, you know, defined process that kind of allows the work and like the research to funnel through? Like how do you engage in new projects? Is it always through a new, you know, mindset? Or curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, all the projects I shared today and many of the projects I'm involved in, I mean, I'm one of several people, you know, and so I certainly don't come to it like with the plan, you know, and I even if I did, I think I would probably be wrong about what the plan should be. No, I think you know, it's that sort of, it is that kind of dance of like, there's, you know, there has to be, I think, some kind of shared vision of what the objectives are. You know, all of these projects have completely been predicated upon not just like the kind of relationship between different kinds of experts or researchers or whatever, but also with some kind of organization, community organization or something, or just or public participants or something like that. So so that's also part of it too. Like, what do they want to get out of it, you know? And so yeah, I mean, I certainly teach, you know, that there are, I think, some more or less like sequential kinds of approaches to doing design research when that's kind of like the specific agenda, but it can vary pretty widely depending on the project. I've done the public history thing with my collaborator several times, so we actually do have kind of a process. It's like terribly messy. It's like always takes way too much work and too long, but like we kind of have a sequence of the kinds of events. But we, you know, to be perfectly honest, I mean, we stumbled into that, you know, as hard as anybody could stumble into anything, you know, like we just didn't know exactly how we were going to work together, and we didn't exactly know what was going to be useful. And I have, you know, tried to put together workshops that just massively failed, you know, and, you know, what do? You move on. Like you take something from it, but you also move on. So, not all projects are as gigantic as some of these that I'm sharing. You know, most of these were multi-year, multi-institution, usually decent amount of grant funding. Even just getting money for these projects takes a while. So, you know, projects can come and go much faster than that as well. It's not a great answer to your question, but I don't think there's an easy playbook.
Okay, good to know. So I know we're almost out of time. I think many of us want to know when we could expect your book to come out. I know you said next year, 2022. But are there any other resources or any other case studies or anything that you could share with us so we could continue to learn more about, you know, the work that you're doing?
What do you mean? Just wait a year. I can send you a link to the book on the MIT's website with a blank cover. No, I mean,
I volunteer to read any desk copies or reviews or anything.
Okay. There you go. You can circulate the uncopy edited versions of them if you like. I will say that, I mean, one of my big goals for that book is, I mean, it's you know, as a particular goal and a particular achievement, I think, to finish the book and get it published. I'm going to spend the summer kind of breaking it up into different kinds of tools. And so I anticipate to make a set of teachable tools that can be used by design educators and students. And I want to make a set of tools for practitioners. Akshat, I'm going to put you on the spot. He's been part of this back and forth text exchange where I had the idea, which seemed like a bad idea, and then it got better and better, which is I'm going to make an entire, like one version of the book entirely just in memes. So it'll be like the meme version of the book, and then like legible version of the book, and then like the video version of the book. So anyway, so there'll be versions of it coming out probably even before the book is released, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, we're looking forward to it. I know we're at time. Just want to say thank you so much for
TikTok version.
For your time and for your wonderful talk. We're going to be uploading this talk on YouTube, so for anyone that didn't get a chance to take screenshots, that'll be on YouTube shortly, so we'll keep you posted. But thank you so much, Matt. And then we hope to hopefully see you next year for another conversation like this once your book is released.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.